Well, hello everyone and welcome to our ASCENT webcast, Creating Exploded and Animated Views in Autodesk Inventor 2017 Presentation Environment. We're happy to have Jennifer McMillan with us today to present this topic. Again, if you have any questions for Jennifer, please do put them in the chat or the Q&A window within WebEx, and I'll come back on at the end and we'll address them at that time. So Jennifer, I will pass things over to you.
Hi everyone, and welcome today. Thank you so much for joining me to spend the next hour. We're going to be working in the presentation environment. So my role with ASCENT is Instructional Design Projects Manager, and my focus is in the manufacturing side of the Autodesk product. So Inventor is definitely my biggest product. More recently, we've released a new Fusion title, so I've worked on that, on the simulation titles as well as some Navisworks and some Showcase and things like that. So definitely busy. Inventor, like I said, though, is one of my favorites and definitely keeps me quite busy. With the introduction of Inventor 2017, it gave me a great opportunity to do this webcast because they've really revamped and totally changed the whole presentation environment. So if you've used it in prior revisions, you probably have noticed by now that you really are starting from scratch again. So what we're going to do over the next hour is talk about that environment. As a previous webcasts have gone, I'm going to work in PowerPoint, and we'll talk a little bit, and then we'll flip over into Inventor and actually show you how the environment works. So with that, we're going to flip over and get started. All of my content today that I am going to talk about is from our Introduction to Solid Modeling class. So this is Chapter 20 of that training guide, and with 2017, it was completely rewritten. So my goals today are going to be, talk a little bit about presentation files and why we use them, and then focus really on the animation and snapshot views that you can create within that environment. And to kind of finish things off, we definitely want to know how to publish those things and create images and videos that you can share with clients or colleagues. So we'll cover that as well. So in terms of creating presentations, I'm sure many of you have used them before, but for the review for any of you new students, they are used to create exploded views and animations. So for a drawing documentation, so you're creating a drawing view and you want to actually create that exploded view of your assembly, the only way that you can do that is to create this presentation file. It's a unique file, so it's called an IPN file, and from there you would create that exploded view that you could use in your drawing. In terms of in the presentation environment, just a few things that you can do. You can move and rotate your components all relative to one another to create that exploded view. You can add trails, which then show how all of those components relate to one another. I can also rotate it into precise orientation, so it might not be my default home view or anything specific like that. I can use different orientations. And then ideally, too, I can create my animation. So a great way to showcase something like an assembly procedure. You can use that and create an animation of that. So what we're going to do is to get started right away is flip in and explain kind of that interface. So it's completely revamped in 2017. So it's actually really streamlined. It's really easy to see and use. And you see here I've got kind of a screen capture of the initial window. So I have created a presentation file. I've imported a wheel assembly, and it's kind of shown here on the right-hand side, shows the component. You have your ribbon up at the top, and so there's a presentation tab. So you have your ribbon at the top, and all of the commands you're going to need to access are right in there. You have a model browser. And that model browser shows you the scene file. So the scene is recording what models you're using. So in this case, I am using my wheel assembly. And it can be expanded out to actually show you all of the components, which is really nice and a nice way that you can select components easily. And the other two components are where we're going to really focus our time today, the snapshot view area. And by default, when you create a new presentation file, it's empty. So you can see there's no snapshots created. And at the very bottom is my storyboard. So that's kind of the final section at the bottom. And that really, it's hard to really see much in it now because we haven't created anything, but that is simply a timeline. And it's basically going to be used to create that animation. So in terms of storyboard, so we're going to start with animation. So that's that bottom section of the interface. What you can do with an animation is create movements. So those movements can be pulling components apart linearly, so with a translational type movement, rotationally as well. So let's say you're unscrewing a screw. You can rotate it out. Rotating a wheel, those types of things. So basically, you have those two movements that you can use. You can also control your component visibility and opacity settings. So you can turn components on and off. You can set them so that they fade out of display, that type of thing. As well, you can capture component orientation. So I mentioned that before. You can spin it into any orientation you want and capture that. So as you're working through your storyboard, you can see here I've got a storyboard that's completed. I get all of my components get listed, so you can see I have a number of components here all listed. And as a change is made, or an actual tweak or a visibility setting, it gets assigned in the timeline. And each one of them lasts a certain length of time. It starts at a certain point in time, and it's really recording the entire animation. So if you've worked with a product maybe like Adobe Captivate, it's very similar to that look and feel, where you have that timeline, you can drag things around. There's a lot more control than what you could use previously in the presentation environment prior to 2017. You can also create multiple storyboards. So right now you can see I only have one, so you can see right up top here I have one storyboard, but I can use this little checkbox or this little plus button to add additional. And one reason why you might want to do that is you want to maybe show your animation an assembly animation, and then you want to actually maybe show a disassembly. So you can create two unique storyboards to record those. And when you create that second storyboard, you can actually start from the end of the previous. So it's really kind of efficient that way if you know that you've already disassembled something and then you want to assemble it again. Or you can just start over again and start with a clean slate. So I mentioned the movements. So that's the movements being like a translational or a rotational. Those are all called tweaks, and that's a word that you're probably familiar with if you used 2016. They used that word then as well. So tweaks are all those little movements that you're recording. Tweaks can be like that linear, they can be planar, they can be rotational, and they can run over a duration. In terms of 2017, it's kind of got this really slick interface now. Once you've selected your components and you've decided that you're going to tweak, you get this toolbar. So I've kind of got it highlighted here. You can see there's a lot of information in here, but it's actually super easy to use. You're basically choosing whether you're moving or rotating, and you're really from that point on working simply with the triad that appears on the components. So I've got two examples here, one where I'm doing a translational move. So you can see I've got a triad that has got all linear type motions. And for the case of the fasteners, I've kind of linearly translated them upwards in the z-axis. The image down here is a rotational movement, and you can see the handles on my triad appear a little differently, and they're all rotational. These triads would be familiar to you, so they brought that in. This is something you'd see in the direct edit tools within Inventor. So it's having more of a consistent feel to these triads as well. And once you've actually added all these tweaks, it gets added into that timeline that I showed you previously, so it's going to show each of those in the timeline. The other spot it appears, which is really nice, is in that model tree. So there becomes this tweak folder. So I've got it right here, and it lists each individual tweak, so you can see all at one spot, you know, what the tweak number is, what the value is, that type of thing. So you've kind of got a couple different options in terms of analyzing it afterwards and looking at it. And most people, when you create your first tweak and you start playing things, you always have to make changes. You almost have to tweak the tweak, right? And in this situation, there's lots of editing tools available to change maybe the actual offset value. So maybe those fasteners weren't fully extended out enough. So that's just using the edit tweak command. You can also edit the time. So by default, it's just going to run over a 2.5 second interval, but let's say you want to make a change to that time. You also have access to the toolbar that allows you to change the time using the edit time option. You can also choose to control the visibility of the trail lines. So you might want them in some situations or not want them. You can control whether or not they're displaying or not. You might also want to just simply add new movements to the tweak, so you can go in and do that as well. So there's lots of options in terms of making changes to the tweak once you've created it. So those are the tweaks, that's the motion changes, so that translational and rotational. Other changes and things that you can record in an animation are your actions. They call them actions, and that's dealing with your model appearance. So model appearance is one where you can control whether the visibility of a component is on or off. So you can kind of see here in my left-hand image, I have a visibility. I can turn that wheel off or on. Opacity is another one, and that's a simple click of a button in the toolbar, and it enables you to create basically these fade actions that will then fade out. So in this case, I'm adding a fade action on the right-hand side to the wheel as well. What's really cool about the fade is you can actually set that to run over a duration, so it fades out slowly, or you can say it's going to be instantaneous at a specific time. So these are just a couple examples, these two toolbars of those two options. And then you get this fade actual option where you can set the control of your opacity value. And then camera position is another action. So camera position basically is recording the orientation of your model. And similar to opacity, it can be set as instantaneous, so it just during the animation, it'll immediately flip into position, or you can run it over duration, so it almost rotates into position. So, you know, that turntable type look, you could then maybe finish your entire assembly and then rotate it around over, let's say, a 5-second duration to spin it into another orientation. And all those orientations can be done using your view cube. You can spin it on your using your mouse, that type of thing. And the key here is that this command is called a capture camera command, and there's an option for that directly on your toolbar. And actually, I'll just point out one last thing. I've got this arrow pointing to the action directly on the timeline. This is added right at the very top, this camera action, and it looks like a camera. So it's really obvious to see when you've added camera position type actions to your animation. And one last thing before we flip into the actual demonstration is the scratch zone. So this is something where it's just setting the stage. So it's the staging area for your model. You can define the orientation, the way you're going to want to start the animation. You can choose any kind of visibility settings on different components. You can set your view display, maybe turn on shadows, maybe ground planes, whatever you want to do in this area. So this is done before your animation actually starts. There's no edit tool for the scratch zone, so you can't go in and edit that later. Basically, it's a unique one-time setting, so if you needed to make a change, you just go in and change it again, and then that's where the the animation would actually start. So I'm going to go over now to Inventor, and we'll get started with a little presentation here showing you this environment. So to start off with, I am actually in an assembly. I have this little wheel assembly. I'm in the assembly environment, and you can see I've got all my components over in the model browser. And I'm going to start by creating a presentation. So I'm just going to use the My Home tab. I like this way of doing things. I'm going to set presentation as the template that I want to use. And it immediately prompts me to insert a file. So I'm going to insert this wheel assembly. Before I actually hit open here, I'm going to show you this options button. And this enables you to actually select any design view representations, a positional representation, or even a level of detail representation that might exist already. So you can actually bring that right in as the model you're going to use. I'm not going to use anything specific here. I have a pretty small assembly. And I'm going to click open. So now we're into that environment that I showed you in my slide. We have the ribbon at the top. We have the model browser. You can see I can expand out my scene. This is scene 1. It's got the wheel. I've got all my components, and you can see as I pick things, I can actually highlight them in the model. And both my snapshot views area and storyboard are empty because this is a brand new file. So what I'm going to do to start is I'm actually going to go into my scratch zone. So I'm going to focus on storyboards, and I just drag my playhead. So that playhead I can move all the way along the timeline, but I'm going to drag it into the staging area, and then I'm going to make an orientation change. I don't want to change any visibility right now, but just an orientation change. So I'm just going to flip it around using my view cube, so I just am looking at it at a different orientation. And from there, I need to capture that camera orientation. So I'm going to click Capture Camera up in the ribbon. So it's now set that as the orientation. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out or animate the removal of the fasteners. So to start with, I'm going to select Tweak Components. And of course, the next point is to actually pick my components. So there's lots of different ways I can do that. I can select directly in the model, or I can pick in the model browser. So I'm going to go over and just pick all of them. I know which ones they are. It's pretty straightforward in this model. And I have 4 selected. So before I move anything, I just want to just quickly review this toolbar. By default, it's set to move. So that's my translational tweak movement. If I was to select rotate here, you can see how the triad has changed for a rotational triad. But I'm going to leave that as move because I just want to drag them out. I also have set automatically by default to set to parts. This is where it's important if you had a large enough assembly maybe that had subcomponents and you wanted, or subassembly, sorry, and you wanted to pull out all of the components with that subassembly at one time, this is where you would choose the component option. But I just have parts, so I'm good there. The next is really handy if you need to customize the orientation of the triad. So right now, my orientation of the triad is just perfect. It is aligned automatically with one of the central axes, so I'm good to go. But if I needed to, let's say we needed to move it in some other orientation, you can relocate that using those commands. And then this next line item is dealing with all your trails. So right now I have all my trails set to show for all components. And you can go in and say no trails or only for parts, not like maybe only for subassemblies, that type of thing. But I'm going to just leave that with all parts. And you can see the duration right now is set to 2.5 seconds. So perfect. I'm just going to leave that. And then I have to move over to the triad. And this is where I actually make all my movements. I'm going to select the Z-axis. And from here, I'm going to drag that out and just position it. Okay, so I can enter a specific value as well. So I'm just going to enter 75 to pull it out to that point. And then select OK. So as soon as I select OK, the tweaks are created. You can see they've appeared now down in my storyboard. I've got the 4 components that have all been manipulated all at once because they were all selected at one time. And we have an animation. So if I was to return my playhead back to the beginning, so I'm going to rewind it, I can select play, and you can see that it's actually playing the removal of those fasteners. I had set it as a linear translational type movement. So you can see that the icon on that component down in the storyboard has got kind of the arrows, and that's showing linear motion. Now, if I want to make a change to that, so let's say I want to right-click on here and I want to change the time. I want to change this to 3 seconds. So I'm going to right-click, select Edit Time, and I'm going to just change that value to 3 seconds. So you can see that only that one component now extended out to 3 seconds versus the other ones are still 2.5. So I need to make changes to all of them. A couple different ways to edit. I can double-click on that and change it manually as well. Probably the easiest, and if you're familiar with any other kind of animation type software, you can drag on these bars and drag out to extend everything. So you can see I can bring all of them in line with one another at 3 seconds. Another edit that I can do here is actually change the actual height. So I extended them out about 75 millimeters. If I right-click on the actual timeline item and say Edit Tweak, this is giving me access to the distance. So at this point, I can change that to, let's say, I don't know, 140. 145 is perfect. And I'm not going to make any changes to the trails. I want everything left as is, and click OK. So the one thing you'll notice here when I hit play is all of the fasteners extend out the same height. And the reason why that's a little different than editing time I have to uniquely change individually. Because all of those components were selected at once, they were created as a group. So when I make that change, they also change as a group. So it's a good reason as to, you know, whether or not you want to move things at the same time or not, whether or not you want that change or that flexibility. So I'm going to make some changes now to a couple other components. The key thing here is that your playhead is always in the right position. So right now, after I played, it returned to time 0. So if I was to make another tweak, it's going to add it at time 0. So I always want to make sure that I'm at the spot where I want to be. For me right now, I want to be at the end, so I want to be at 3 seconds when I can make my next tweak. So I'm going to select Tweak Components, and this time I'm going to pick this front bracket. I'm going to leave all my defaults. Everything looks fine. I'm going to change this to run at 3 seconds instead, so I don't have to go back and edit that time. And I can select the x-axis and drag that out. And I'm just going to enter about a minus 175 and define it as is. So I'm going to select OK at this point. And you can see that now I've got that bracket assigned in the storyboard, and it is translating out for an additional 3 seconds. The wheel component is my next component, so I can select the wheel and say I'm going to tweak it. And what I want to show you here that's a little different is I can add multiple tweaks. So to start with, I'm going to tweak on the x-axis, and I'm going to drag that out about, I don't know, about 110, we'll say. But I'm going to move a second time. So I'm going to create a second motion, and it's going to be in the z-axis this time. And I'm going to move it up about 120. And then to continue, I'm actually going to add a third one, which is rotate. So to do the rotation, though, I need to go back over to my toolbar and select the rotate button. Now I get access to that other triad, and I can rotate that into position. I think it'll snap to 90, so I don't need to edit anything, so you can see that how that's rotated. And again, they've all been added at 3 seconds, so I can select OK. And you can see what happens down on the timeline. So basically, with 3 motions, I've added 9 seconds of time to my animation. You can see the wheel has a number of different motions here. If I expand this out, you can actually see what they are. So the first one, if I highlight it, is showing that translation on the X, and the translation on the Y, and then the rotation. So what I can do here as well, which is really nice, is overlap. So all of those just happened consecutively, but I actually want to overlap my motion of the rotating kind of wheel as it's moving up. So I can actually drag this timeline item directly, say something like that, make it a little bit smaller. I can even drag up the time a little bit if I wanted to, and have it look something like this. So let's play this back. I'm not gonna play the whole thing. I'll maybe move it to about here while the bracket is moving out. So you can see that the bracket is moving, and there comes the wheel, and you can see how that's moved into position. The timeline is returned to where I started, so just always remember that that's the case, and it's always paying attention to where it is when you start to add additional tweaks. So a couple additional tweaks now that I'm going to do is I need to move the rest of the components. So I'm going to fast forward again to the end so that I make sure I'm adding it at the exact right time. And these ones I'll do pretty quickly. I'm going to select my axle. I'm going to tweak this, and I'm just really going to move this out about 100 and something. Yeah, so that's perfect. Again, it's keeping that default of 3. That's what was changed prior. And I can select OK. Next one I can do again, maybe move the bracket out, and move this out somewhere around there, and click OK. And this last one as well, I'm going to tweak the placement of the plate and drag that down somewhere around there, and select OK. So now I have a whole consecutive group of movements as I go. I'm going to just kind of fast forward or rewind, sorry, back to about here and just play that out to show you what's happening. So we're just finishing up the motion of the wheel being disassembled. And here comes the axle, and then that final bracket, and then the plate. Now at the very end, what I might want to do is instead of having those two bracket and plate disassembled separately, I could just overlay them so that they actually move out of position together. And then I could shorten it up again if I wanted to. So drag those a little bit closer. So if I was to play maybe just a little bit more for you, there comes the axle, and you can see that I've now overlaid those two translational motions so that they're happening at the same time. So you have a lot of flexibility just by dragging and moving things within the timeline directly on that storyboard. So we've dealt with all of the tweaks now. So some of the other things that we can deal with are the trails. So right now you can see the trails are all displayed on my model. Let's say I wanted to actually remove those. So I had set them to be on by default, but let's say I've now decided I want to remove them. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it. Over in the model browser, I can expand out the tweaks folder. If I was to right-click on any one of these tweaks, I can select hide trails individually. So that would be one by one. I'd have to do that if I wanted to remove them all. But a much easier way is to actually select directly on the tweak folder, and there we go, and select hide all trails. And you can see now that they've all removed from the window. So it's a nice way of just clearing them all off. This is a pretty easy assembly. I don't want to show them for now. The next thing I can do is maybe show you that opacity setting. And this is something, let's say I want to change up the way that the fasteners appear after they have been taken out of the assembly. So right at that 3-second mark, you can see that they've reached kind of the height that I've pulled them out to. And I'm going to try and add this fade option here. I'm going to select the components. So you can see here I'm selecting them in the storyboard, so that's another way of selection. I've selected all 4 of them, and I go up to my ribbon and I can select opacity. Immediately I'm presented with a window. What it's telling me is basically if I want to change the opacity setting on these components, I have to break the link with the associative design view. So I used the master design view when I brought it in, and I maintained that associative link. So if I select break here, it's going to break that link to the actual design. And this is the only way that you'll be able to do this if you wanted to add opacity. So I've broken the link now, and you can see here I can change the opacity to 0. So it's going to completely fade out those components. And select OK. Down in the toolbar, you can see my icons have actually changed a little bit. And the reason they've changed is simply that it has now it has kind of merged 2 different actions. So I still have that move action plus the opacity setting is right here. It's kind of small. If I right-click on this and select Edit Time, so you can see by default it's an instantaneous action. So as soon as you hit that time, it's going to immediately turn to 0 opacity setting. I actually want to run that over a duration. I want it to fade out slowly. I want to see it fade out. So I'm going to just change those values. And do that. So you can see now it's actually showing, because I'm at 3 seconds, it hasn't quite finished yet. I can do the same thing with the other settings as well. And this is one of those as well where you have to, unfortunately, manually change each one of the time settings. And we can do that for all 4 of them. And one last one here. Time. So that they all fade out at the same. I'm going to just return to the beginning of my animation and just play and show you what's going to happen. I'm going to stop it before it finishes, but it'll give you a good idea of what's happening. They get into position, they fade out slowly, and then the bracket moves and everything else continues to move. So you can see how that opacity setting works. I think that is quite a neat one when you start creating some animations to use. So now I'm going to just show you the last type of action you can add within a storyboard, and that was the capture camera, the capture orientation. So I want this to happen at the very end, so I'm going to make sure that I fast forward to the end and it flips up to 17.7 or wherever we are about there, 17.7 on my timeline. And what I want to do at this point is rotate it using my view cube. So I'm going to go up into my view cube and I'm going to change maybe back to my home orientation. And you can see how it spins into position there. And I'm going to click Capture Camera. And if I scroll up, actually I'm going to compress some of these fastener components. You can scroll up. You can see this very top line entry is that camera position. And it is added it as a duration, which is great. It's not an instantaneous thing. But what it does is it adds it prior to the end of the animation. I actually want to move that a little bit, so I want it to actually run afterwards, and I can drag it out to, say, last 3 seconds. So everything looks good there. I'm going to flip it, the timeline, just forward or back a little bit. And we'll play it from the beginning. So I'm going to pause that and start it, let's say, around here. Yeah, that'll give us some time. So you can see how the axle's coming out. Then my next 2 components are going to move out together. And then the camera rotation. So that brings that into a last kind of orientation for the kind of to finalize the presentation or the animation. So I mentioned the scratch zone, and I set everything in the scratch zone initially with my orientation. But you can actually change, your visibility settings as well. And this is something I just wanted to quickly show you before we finish up here. I can go into my View tab. So this is all convenient, like this is just like in modeling environment, everything. And I can choose my view settings. So let's say I can add, let's say, an ambient shadow just to kind of refine how it's going to look. I can change my visual style, so I can change it maybe to technical illustration. And what that's doing is again, it's capturing, it's staging the animation. So it's starting you off right at the very beginning with this view. So I can hit play, and you can see how the animation will play with this display style. In this case, with the technical illustration, one thing I don't like is that it doesn't actually show the threads on your components. So that's what it looked a little funny on those. But anyway, it's just a display style that you can look at. With this display style, though, you cannot store it with the presentation. The view settings are all unique to the actual session that you're running in Inventor, so it's something that you would have to reset if you wanted to. So to finish up here, I just want to publish this out. I can go back to my presentation tab and select video. And with that, I get the access to the Publish Video dialog box. And here I can choose whether I want to publish all storyboards. I only have one, so I'm just going to select current. I could also select a range, so if I want to run from 4 seconds to 17 seconds, I can do that as well. My video resolution, I can say, well, I just want it to view what's on the screen right now. I can customize that if I want. I can define a name. I can change whether or not it's an AVI or a movie file. So I can do all those things and select OK, and it'll publish it. I'm not going to click Publish here at this point just because it will take a little bit. So I can just flip over and show you one that I have previously recorded. And that'll play out for us, and you can just see how that's created. This one I actually created without any compression, so you can see the quality of the graphics is actually pretty cool. I have shadows turned on here, and that's kind of what that little fade is in it. But you get a pretty high quality animation. You can see how it's spinning at the last little bit into the orientation. The reason it's cut off at the bottom of the screen was just simply that setting that I had was to read the whole screen resolution, and I had it hidden. My screen wasn't displaying everything. So that's what I wanted to show you in terms of the storyboard. So to finish up here, we'll get back into the PowerPoint presentation, and we'll look at snapshot views. So this is the other thing that is very good in terms of presentation environment. And this is one thing that anybody that creates an exploded view in a drawing needs to use. So it's basically creating that unique one-time snapshot of a view. You use them to create them, you can, very much like the animations, you can create tweaks, so it exposes it to a certain location. You can set visibility settings. You can select any of those same opacity settings, camera position, so that orientation, as well as any view settings. So it's very similar in terms of setup to the animation. It's just not happening on a timeline. They're all unique times. You can create your snapshot with or without a storyboard. So lots of times people don't need animations, but they need that exploded view. So you only need to create snapshots in those situations. If you have a storyboard, what's really nice there is you can drag along the storyboard timeline and create snapshots at points that you need in the animation. So for instance, with a disassembly, you might have step 1, step 2, step 3, and you can add all those steps. As you make changes to the timeline, then you can also update those snapshots, which is all dependent on one another. Snapshots also in terms of editing. So I mentioned if you are grabbing your snapshot from the timeline, if you make changes in the timeline, it updates automatically. Or not automatically, you have to actually manually update it by selecting this update option on the snapshot. If you needed to make any major changes in the snapshot view, you can also break your link with the actual animation timeline, so you can have a unique one at that point. And if you have any independent snapshots, so snapshots that you've created without a storyboard, or snapshots that you created in the scratch zone, you can actually edit all of those using the Edit View tab, and those give you access to pretty much all the same commands exactly that we talked about already, the tweak, the update camera, that type of thing, which is going to allow you to do all that. And then finally, how to use those snapshot views in a drawing. So very straightforward, you create your snapshot. It's as simple as a right-click on the presentation snapshot, and you say, I want to create a drawing file, or sorry, a drawing view. If then pops up and it'll say, what template do you want to use, that type of thing. If you're actually creating, using maybe an explode in an already existing drawing, you're basically just adding a new drawing view. And because it's pulling from that presentation file, you get access to all of those snapshot views directly in the dialog box. So right in here, and you can actually pick from which one you want to display in your drawing. So we'll just flip again back over into Inventor and finish things up here. So I'm going to continue working in this presentation that I've created. So I've already created that storyboard. What I want to do now is move to the beginning of my timeline. So I'm going to turn off the illustration and just turn it to realistic again. So I'm looking more at a shaded model. I'm now at time 0. And what I want to do is create basically a snapshot of the assembled view. So in my presentation tool, I'm going to select New Snapshot View. And the snapshot view appears in that area. I can go in, right-click, and just rename it. Always good to rename it, because when you go to find it in your drawing, when you actually want to add that view, it's much easier to find with a realistic name. So I've created one snapshot. I can then use my tie line, drag it out to about 2.5 seconds. So this is just prior to the opacity changing on those fasteners. And I can say New Snapshot View. And if I rename this, I can say this is step 1, pulling out those fasteners. So pretty straightforward. I've got now the 2 views. And right off the bat, you should notice a difference between the 2 of them. One of them has this little icon in the bottom right corner, and one doesn't. So the difference between that is that step 1 is actually referring and dependent on the storyline, the storyboard, sorry. You can see down in the storyboard on the timeline, there's a little blue icon. You can see it here, and that's just basically saying that there was a snapshot created at that point in time. And so that relationship exists. Fully assembled, we created that at time 0. It doesn't create a relationship at time 0. It also doesn't create one if you're in the scratch zone when you create a snapshot. So I'm just going to create a couple other ones here as we're going, just to get kind of a few created. I'm going to create one there. Let's pull this out, say, to about here, and then say New Snapshot, and this is kind of when the wheel is brought out. 3, go to there. Snapshot, so my axle is now moved out. Step 4. And then just before I rotate, so just before, so we'll go here. And you can see that's after the bracket and the plate have moved in out of position as well. So again, another final snapshot to end it. Prior to rotating, I don't need to see that. So I've created 6 different snapshot views, all in my snapshot view window here. Now I want to make just some changes. So we talk about editing. We always have to make changes. Let's just think right now about step 5. I don't actually, in a visual image file, I don't need to know that that plate actually has moved down. I just want to know that the brackets have kind of moved out from it. So I can go in and right-click on this step 5 and select Edit. And once I do that, it actually brings up just the edit tools for that snapshot view. I can right-click on the plate, right-click, and select Delete Tweak Last. Okay, so this is going to remove that Z translation that I had added. Again, what it's going to do immediately is prompt me and say, well, you asked me initially to create it dependent on the timeline. Now you're making changes. Do you want to break the link? And I do want to break the link. I don't want to keep that referenced anymore. It's going to be unique, completely unique snapshot, and you can see how I've done that. I'm going to select Finish View, and you can see it goes back to my default interface. And now step 5 is unique. It does no longer have that little icon down in the bottom corner saying that's reference to the timeline. That's kind of one change that I've made there. Another change, let's say I want to make a change to my timeline. So I'm going to expand out my fastener components here. And I actually want to remove, let's say I want to remove that opacity setting. I can actually select all 4 of them. I've just held down the Control key and selected each of them. I'm going to right-click and select Delete. And you can see now that they are, again, now they appear in my actual animation. And if you look at the snapshot view window, I've got some out-of-date images. So immediately I have an out-of-date image of step 2, 3, and 4. So I need to select this Update View option to bring that back in line with what's actually happening now on the timeline, because I've removed those opacity settings. So always be looking for that icon in that area if you want to update it. And you don't always have to update it. Maybe you don't want to. You want to have a unique image just to maybe create a raster image or something, and that's fine as well. It's just that's what that icon is indicating. It's out of date with what's on the timeline. So step 4, I'm going to, let's say, go to this one, and I'm going to activate it by selecting it. So it's my active one right now. And I'm going to right-click and edit it. And in this one, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rotate it. So I'm just using my Control, my Shift key, and just rotating it here in my window. And you can see it's just a little unique. It's a little different than what was on the timeline. And I'm going to select Finish. And you can see in this situation, so it was a little different, when I changed and deleted the opacity settings, when I changed the visibility and the orientation, I actually had to break a link. But with this change, I didn't have to do that. So visibility, start over again. Anytime you change the orientation, that does not require you to break the link with the, so I can still connect with visibility settings or anything that's happening on the timeline. It's just now a new orientation. And I realized I made a quick mistake there because I did not click Capture Camera. I'm going to go back and do that one more time and show you what I mean. Okay, so I've rotated it. I have to click Update Camera on that view. And once I do that, you can see how the view has updated. I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so I see everything in the screen. And click Update Camera again, and now you can see it's displayed with everything. And I didn't need to break a link, and it's a unique snapshot view. So I want to go now back to the beginning. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to create one last unique snapshot view. And this one is now created here. You can see I want to create this as fully exploded. So this is something where, let's say you don't ever want to create an animation or storyboard. If you're just wanting to explode, you can do that within the editing tools for the snapshot. So I'm going to double-click on my fully exploded snapshot, and from here, I'm going to use those tweak tools. So the tweak tools are the same. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because it's identical to what we've done. I can pick all of my components, and I think my tweak is right there, so I can drag those out. I'm not going to worry too much about distances. I'm going to tweak out this. I'm going to tweak this, this, and this. You can see now that I've created a quick exploded view. Okay, so you can see now it's applied. I want to actually hide all my trails, so I can do that as well. Let's say I want to rotate it a little bit and create a unique view. Update camera, and you can see now this exploded view is very unique. I can finish up the edit. It's not tied to the timeline because I created it at time 0. I could have also created it in the scratch zone to create that unique view, but this is going to give me access now to create a drawing view. So if I right-click on this snapshot, I can say create a drawing view. It's just prompting me here. Oh, I have to save it before, so yeah, please save me. I'm going to save my assembly file or my IPN file, create a standard drawing file, and immediately that view comes up. You can see I can just go and drag that and change my scaling. And in the drawing view dialog box, I could pick the pull-down menu here, and you can see I have access to all of those steps that I also created. Okay, I'm going to use my fully exploded one. I think that looks pretty good. Maybe change it to shaded and click OK. So now I have that view. So that was created from the presentation file, and that's the only way that I could have created that exploded view. So you can see kind of what I've done here. I've created my storyboard with an animation, a full animation on maybe the disassembly instructions, as well as 7 different unique snapshots. One last thing I wanted to show you here. I showed you how to publish out this storyboard, but I can also publish out these raster images, and that's just using this raster option. I'm going to select all views, so I want to actually publish all of them. Current window is perfect, and ping files, that's great. I'm going to select OK. You can see it's just creating those images right now. It's just flipping between each of them. And if I go back over into my PowerPoint, into Windows Explorer, you can see now that each of those PNG files have been created in my folder for me, so I can use those at any time. And let's actually, I might look at the fully exploded one. The quality is actually quite nice, so you can see it's actually a high quality rendering of the model. So I just have grayscale right now, but if you had color, all that stuff you can definitely use to make it look a little nicer. So to finish up, just a couple of housekeeping things. I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation that I work on the manufacturing products. I know we always have a lot of ATCs on this call, on these calls, so you can see here what we've released so far this year. New to our list, I just added this actually in the last couple of days, is an update class. So Inventor update for 2015 and 2016 users. And this is looking to come out beginning of October. So this is keeping me busy right now. I'm working on this and creating a course that will be good for people with an update learning this. And this presentation chapter is actually in there because it's completely new. And then the cable and harness are to follow, and everything else is released right now. In terms of our formats, so many of you are familiar with our stuff. We have all of our books available in print, and then you can purchase those through the ASCENT eStore or Amazon. Also, we have video-enhanced ebooks or video-enhanced courses. So we have lots of options for you as well, so we can help you out for sure. So with that, I'm going to say thank you and hand it back over to Kareem.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jennifer. So just to wrap up, I wanted to let everyone know the different ways that you can contact us. So we have an ASCENT eStore, which is the first website there, ascentestore.com, where you can purchase any of the courseware titles and printed format, an ebook or video enhanced ebook, as Jennifer mentioned. You can also go through our website, which is the last link there, ASCENT.ed or ASCENTED.com. From there, you can also access our eStore. We also have helpful information on there, such as the page count of our books, the table of contents, several chapters, of course, the pricing as well. And we invite you to follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, LinkedIn, and we have a blog where all of our authors, including Jennifer, contribute updates. So Jennifer, thank you for your presentation today. Thank you everyone for joining us.